Thanks, Alexander, for the invite. So yeah, I'm a research scientist at Google Research just across the street. I want to talk today about a paper that we just put up on Archive, which is a new model for text-to-image generation via masked generative transformers. And as you can guess from these figures, the name of the model is Muse. So this is work that I've done with an awesome set of colleagues at Google Research. The paper and a web page is online. So many of you must be familiar with text-to-image generation, which has really advanced in the last year or two. And a question might be, why text-to-image generation? I think it's because text is a very natural control mechanism for generation. We are able to express our thoughts, creative ideas through the use of text. And then that allows non-experts, non-artists to generate compelling images and then be able to iterate them through editing tools to create your own personal art and ideas. Also, very importantly, deep learning requires lots of data, and it is much more feasible to collect large-scale paired image-text data. An example is the Lion 5 billion data set on which models such as Stable Diffusion have been trained. So we should recognize that various biases exist in these data sets, and bias mitigation is an important research problem. And lastly, these models can exploit pre-trained large language models, which are very powerful, and they allow for extremely fine-grained understanding of text, parts of speech, nouns, verbs, adjectives, and then be able to translate those semantic concepts to output images. And these LLMs, importantly, can be pre-trained on various text tasks with orders of magnitude larger text data. So you can pre-train with text-only data and then use paired data to do the text-to-image translation training. So what's the state of the art? You must be familiar with many of these. So DALL-E 2 from OpenAI was one of the first models, which is a diffusion model that was built on pre-trained clip representations. I won't have time to go into each of these terminologies, so I'm sorry if some of it is not familiar. Imagen from Google is also a diffusion model that was built on a pre-trained large language model. Parti, which is another large-scale model from Google, is an autoregressive model on latent token space. And stable or latent diffusion is a model released from Stability AI, which is a diffusion model on latent embeddings. So here's an example that is showing comparing DALL-E 2, Imagen, and the Muse model on this particular text prompt. I'll go revisit this example and point out some pros and cons of the different models later. Some image editing applications that have been built on these models. One example is personalization via a tool called Dream Booth, which was a paper written by some of my colleagues. So here the idea is that instead of generating, for example, an image of a cat, you can generate an image of your cat by fine-tuning the model on some images of your own cat and then doing text-guided generation of your cat. So that's actually proven extremely popular. A couple of apps built on the Dream Booth tool have gone to the top of the App Store, and many people have used it to generate their own avatars for on social media. Another example is a fine-tuning for instruction following, so that one can do various kinds of flexible mask-free editing. For example, here on this top right image, we say add fireworks to the sky, and then the model after fine-tuning, has an understanding of concepts such as the sky and fireworks, and it's able to do a reasonably good job of following the instruction. So how's Muse different from the prior models that I listed? So firstly, it's neither a diffusion model nor is it autoregressive, although it has some connections to both diffusion and autoregressive family of models. It is extremely fast. So for example, a 512 by 512 image is generated in 1.3 seconds instead of 10 seconds for Imagen or Party, and about 4 seconds for Stable Diffusion on the same hardware. And on quantitative evals such as clip score and FID, which are measures of how well the text prompt and the image line up with each other, that's the clip score. And FID is a measure of the image quality itself, the diversity and fidelity. The model performs very well. So it has similar semantic performance and quality as these much larger models, but significantly faster inference, and it has significantly better performance than Stable Diffusion. All of these statements just hold true at this point in time. All of these models keep improving, so there could be a new model that does even better, next week. And some applications that are enabled by the way we train the model are zero-shot editing. So I'll show some examples of that. Mask-free editing, in-painting to remove objects, uncropping to expand beyond the boundaries of an image. So I'll give a quick overview of the architecture here and then go into the individual components one by one. Muse is mostly a transformer-based architecture for both the text and image parts of the network. But we also use CNNs, and we also use vector quantization, and we also use GAN. So we're using a lot of the toolkits in the modern CNN, modern deep network, from the toolbox. We use image tokens that are in the quantized latent space of a CNN VQ GAN, and we train it with a masking loss, which is similar to the masking loss used in large language models. So the model is basically learning how to reconstruct masked tokens. You pass in a set of tokens, mask a bunch of them at random, and then learn to predict that. And just by doing that with variable masking ratios enables it to get very good quality generation. We have two models, a base model that generates 256 by 256 size images, and then a super resolution model that upscales that to 512 by 512. Okay. So the first major component is this pre-trained large language model. So we use a language model trained at Google called the T5XXL model, which has about 5 billion parameters, which was trained on many text tasks, text-to-text tasks such as translation, question answering, and classification. And when a text prompt is provided, it's passed in through the text encoder, and we get a sequence of vectors of dimension 4096, which are then projected down to another lower dimensional sequence, and those set of text tokens are then passed into the rest of the network. And then we use cross-attention from the text to the image tokens to guide the generation process. The next component is the vector quantized latent space. So for this, we built first a VQ GAN, which is simply a form of autoencoder with some vector quantization built into the latent space. And the reason we use a quantized set of tokens, in most of the models we use 8,000 tokens, 8192, is that this is amenable to a cross-entropy classification type loss. So when you want to predict what token is missing, you just say, which of the 8192 tokens does it need to be? And that's a classification loss. And we find that this works much more effectively than a regression loss where you might try to predict the exact pixel values of the missing token. The VQ GAN has an entirely convolutional structure, an encoder-decoder structure, which we found performs better than either transformer-based VQ GANs or hybrid approaches that mix transformers and CNNs. We use a downsampling ratio of 16, which generates latent. So when you go through the encoder layers of the CNN, you get a latents that are of size 16 by 16 from a 256 by 256 input. And the super resolution model uses another VQ GAN with latents of size 64 by 64. So those are larger latents because we want more information in each of those super resolution latents. The VQ GAN is built on work from this paper called MaskIt, which was also from our group. So a key component of our masking, of our training is this idea of variable ratio masking. So given a set of tokens, you have an image, it goes through the VQ tokenizer, and then you get a sequence of, say, 196 tokens. What we do is to drop a variable fraction of those tokens to then pass into the network to learn to predict. So unlike LLMs, where you usually have a fixed ratio of tokens that's dropped, here we use a variable distribution, which is biased towards a very high value of about 64% of the tokens being dropped. And we find that this makes the network much more amenable to editing applications like inpainting and uncropping. And since it's variable, at inference time, you can then pass in masks of different sizes. And since it has done that during training, it's able to do that during inference time. OK, so here's the base model, which is producing 256 by 256 size images. So this is a transformer-based model, the base transformer, that gets in the mask tokens, and also the text tokens. So these mask tokens are the image tokens, and then we have the text tokens. So we have cross-attention from the text tokens to image, and also self-attention between the image tokens. During training, all the tokens are predicted in parallel with the cross-entropy loss. But during inference, we find that it is better to do an iterative schedule where we predict a subset of the tokens first. We choose tokens with the highest confidence, pass those back in as unmasked tokens, and repeat this process for about 12 or 24 steps until all of the tokens are unmasked. We find that this significantly increases the quality of the result. And then the super resolution model upsamples the 256 by 256 image to 512 by 512. Importantly, this does this in token space by transforming the latents from 16 by 16 to 64 by 64. And we use cross-attention from the text embedding as well as the low-res tokens and pass it into the high-res transformer. So we mask the high-res tokens, but the low-res are left unmasked. The text embedding is left unmasked, and the super-res model is trained to predict the masked high-res tokens. So you can see the effect here, especially on the text. The low-res output of 256 by 256, it is hard to see the text. And then once it's corrected in token space, you can read the text. The facial features of the hamster are much more clear. Many details are reconstructed in token space. What we found is that a cascade of models is actually very important. If you directly try to train a 512 by 512 model, the model tends to focus too much on the details. Whereas if you first train a low-res model, you get the overall semantics or the layout of the scene right, somewhat like what an artist might do, where you get the scene right first and then start filling in the details. So one of the things we are looking at is how to maybe increase the depth of this cascade, go from 128 to 256 to 512, see if that improves further the quality. So here you can see, so here's a comparison of our token-based super resolution comparing to a diffusion-based, pixel-based super resolution. So here on the left, the text prompt here is a rabbit playing the violin. And this is these are two samples from the model of 256 by 256 resolution. And on the top right is the result of our token-based super resolution output. So you can see that the musical notes, the details on the violin, all of these are much more clear. But if we just took this and did a diffusion-based super resolution, which is just pixel hallucination, that doesn't look so good. So our token super resolution plays well with our token-based approach. So another important kind of a heuristic or a trick is something called classifier-free guidance, which we found is crucial at inference time to trade off diversity and quality. What this trick does is to simply trade off, push the logits away from unconditional generation and towards text conditional generation. So you can think of the scale as the amount by which you're pushing away from unconditional generation. And here's a comparison. The image on the left, the two images on the left were generated by with a guidance scale of 0.5. So there's more diversity in the poses of the cat and the backgrounds. But it's not as, there are more errors, for example, here on the mouth of the cat, compared to the two images on the right, which are generated with a much larger guidance scale. So during training, we just drop some tokens with a probability of 10%. We drop conditioning with a probability of 10%, but then at inference time, we choose a particular guidance scale. Another trick, so many tricks here to make the images look good, is something called negative prompting. So the idea here is that there are concepts which one cannot say in the text prompt itself. For example, if you would like to generate an image but not have trees in it, it's somewhat cumbersome to say that in the text prompt. So the classifier-free guidance allows us to say, generate this scene, but don't have trees in it. And we do that by pushing away from the negative prompt. So here's an example. The text prompt says Cyberpunk Forest by Salvador Dali. So that generated, these are two examples that were generated using that prompt. And then I added a negative prompt where I said, I don't want trees, I don't want green and blurry. That was the text prompt that I provided. And then it generates these other kinds of styles, which seem to respect the negative prompt. So that is a very useful trick for generating images closer to the things you're thinking of in your head. This is, so this is the iterative decoding I mentioned earlier at inference time. And you can see that decoding tokens in multiple steps is very helpful for high-quality generation. So here's a sequence of unmasking steps, which are generating tokens up to 18 steps. And there's a steady improvement in the quality of the output. Our base model uses 24 steps, and the super resolution model uses 8 steps. But these number of steps are significantly lower than the 50 or 1,000 steps that are required by diffusion models. And this is actually one of the most important reasons for the speed of our approach. So we get like a 10x lower number of forward props that we need to push through the model. However, these days, there's these ideas of progressive distillation, which can potentially reduce the number of steps for diffusion models, and we hope to exploit that to further reduce our sampling steps. Okay, so we did some, so now on to evals. That was a quick tour of the entire model. So we did some qualitative evals where we took a set of 1,650 prompts from the party paper and generated images from our model and the stable diffusion model and sent it to raters to answer the question, which of the two images, one from our model, one from stable diffusion, which of them matches the prompt better? So the raters preferred our model 70% of the time, compared to 25% of the time for stable diffusion. And for the remaining few percent, they were indifferent, so we removed those from this plot. We also did some qualitative evals on various properties of the model. How well does it respect things like cardinality? So here it's about counting. So we have 3 elephants standing on top of each other. We get 3 elephants, 4 wine bottles, so 1, 2, 3, 4, a tiny football in front of 3 yellow tennis balls. So it seems to respect all of those. However, when the count goes up beyond 6 or 7, the model tends to start making mistakes. Here we are looking at different styles. So here's a portrait of a well-dressed raccoon, oil painting in the style of Rembrandt, pop art style, and a Chinese ink and wash painting style. Other evals are about composition, geometric composition, 3 small yellow boxes on a large blue box, and a large present with a red ribbon to the left of a Christmas tree, etc. We find that if you want to render text, then it does a reasonable job if there's not too many words in the text, so 1 word or 2 words. The model is able to render them well. And we are also able to provide very long, detailed prompts. So here's an example, an art gallery displaying Monet paintings. The art gallery is flooded. Robots are going around the art gallery using paddle boards. So a lot of this power comes from the language model itself, which is really, really powerful and able to represent each of those concepts in the embedding space. And what we're able to do is to map that to pixels. It's still mind-blowing, though. It's still amazing that we can get these kinds of outputs from text prompts. Here are some failure cases, like I mentioned. Here we asked the model to render a number of words, and it did not do such a good job. 10 wine bottles, and it stopped at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. Here's a subjective comparison to other state-of-the-art models. So one thing to say is that in this space, the evaluations are, in my opinion, not very robust. Because by definition, often the text prompts and the styles we ask for are not natural. We want various mix and match of styles. And so an important open research question in my mind is, how do you evaluate that model A is better than model B, other than just looking at some results? I think that's a very interesting and open question. So here I'll just point out a couple of things with the example at the bottom, which is a rainbow-colored penguin. And DALL-E 2 is generating penguins, but doesn't do such a good job with the colors, whereas the Imagen and Muse models seem to be able to respect both. And we think this is probably because the DALL-E 2 model is relying on a clip embedding, which might lose some of these details. We did some quantitative eval on the metrics that we have, which is FID and clip, on a data set called CC3M, and compared to a number of other models, both in diffusion and autoregressive type models. Here, for FID score, lower is better, and for clip, higher is better. So overall, we seem to be scoring the best on both of these metrics. And here's the eval on COCO comparing to many of the state-of-the-art models like DALL-E, DALL-E 2, Imagen, Party, and we are almost as good as the Party 20 billion model, just slightly worse in FID score, but doing significantly better on clip score. So that's good, which means that we are able to respect the semantics of the text prompt better than those models, if one was to believe the clip score. And finally, a runtime on TPU v4 hardware, where here's the model, the resolution that is generated, and the time, wall clock time that it took. So most of the compute goes into the super resolution. The base model takes 0.5 seconds, and then it takes another 0.8 seconds to do the super resolution for a total of 1.3 seconds. So now here are some examples of the editing that are enabled by the model. On the left is a real input image, and we've drawn a mask over one part of the image. and then ask the model to fill that in with a text-guided prompt. So a funny big inflatable yellow duck, hot air balloons, and a futuristic, streamlined, modern building. So all that came just zero shot. We didn't do any fine-tuning of the model, but the fact that we trained it with variable masking allows it to do this out of the box. So another example where we do outpainting. So the mask here is the rest. We only want to keep the this person and replace the rest of the image. And the text-guided prompt was provided to fill in the rest of the region. So the London skyline, a wildflower bloom at Mount Rainier on the ring of Saturn. We can also do other kinds of editing where we took a real image there was a negative prompt used, a man wearing a t-shirt, and then these were the positive prompts to do various kinds of style transfer on the t-shirt. And here are some examples of mask-free editing where on the top row are input images, and on the bottom are the transformed outputs where it just relies on the text and attention between the text and images to make various changes. So for example, here we say a Shiba Inu, and that the model converts the cat to a Shiba Inu dog. A dog holding a football in its mouth. So here the dog itself changes, and then this ball changes to a football. A basket of oranges, where the model is able to keep the general composition of the scene and just change the apples to oranges. The basket texture has also changed a little bit, but mostly the composition is kept similar. Here it's able to change make the cat yawn without changing the composition of the scene. And one of the things we are exploring is how we can have further control of the model, really be able to adjust specific parts of the image without affecting the rest. And here's an example of iterative editing where the image at the top was provided on the top right, and then on the bottom right is the output for a croissant next to a latte with a flower latte art. And these are, we ran the editing for 100 steps, progressively adjusting the tokens, and these are the results of the different iterations of inference. So you can see that it starts with the cake and the latte, and then progressively transforms the cake to something that looks in between the cake and the croissant, and then finally it looks like the croissant. And similarly, the latte art changes from a heart to a flower, kind of some kind of an interpolation in some latent space. So because of the speed of the model, there's some possibility of interactive editing. So I'll just play this short clip which shows how we might be able to do interactive work with the model. So that's real time, as in it's not sped up or slowed down. It's not perfect, but you can see the idea. Okay, so next steps for us are improving the resolution quality, handling of details such as rendered text, probing the cross-attention between text and images to enable more control, exploring applications. So yeah, the paper and web page are listed here, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Maybe I have one question just to get things started. I'm curious, in your opinion, what are the most important contributions that Muse made specifically to achieve the very impressive speed-up results, right? Because in comparison to the past methods, it's really like a huge gap. So I'm curious, what across the many contributions led to that, in your opinion?
Yeah, it was primarily the parallel decoding. So in autoregressive models, by definition, you decode one token at a time. So you have to go, let's say the image consists of 196 tokens, then you're doing 196 steps because you unmask one token, pass it back in, get number 2, and so on. In diffusion models, what you have to do is to denoise step by step. You start with pure noise, pass it through the network, get something out, then pass it back in and repeat this process. And that process needs to be fairly slow, otherwise it breaks down. And a lot of the research is about how to speed that up. So that takes thousands of steps. So if you have a comparable model, there's just a fundamental number of forward props that need to be done. So what we did instead was to go for parallel decoding. And there, instead of one token at a time, you just do n tokens at a time. And then if it's fixed, then you just need 196 by n steps. And the idea is that if you use high confidence tokens, then they are potentially conditionally independent of each other at each step. And each of them can be predicted without affecting the other. So that seems to hold up.
Interesting.
So the prompt is allowing you to navigate the latent space of the image itself. Have you done any analysis or looked at what is the relationship between the prompting and the directions or velocity or any other sort of metric that you can look at in that latent representation exploration?
Yeah, it's a good question. We haven't yet done a very thorough investigation. What we looked at was, and I don't have it here, but we looked at some cross-attention maps between the text embeddings and the image, the generated image. And what you can see is that it does what you might expect, which is that there's cross-attention between the different nouns and the objects in the image. When you have a verb that connects two objects, it seems to then highlight both those objects, sort of paying attention to that. So that's one level of exploration, but I think we need to do more about, like, as we walk around in latent space, what's the resulting image? If we move between two text prompts, what happens? We don't know yet if the latent space is smooth or it has abrupt jumps. The editing suggests some smoothness here as you iterate, but this is with a fixed prompt, not with a changing prompt. So I think we need to do more.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a question about like the cardinality portion of the results. Like one of the failure cases show that like the model can't really handle if you give it more than like 6 or 7 of the same item, but sometimes when you don't specify anything in the prompt, it automatically generates like more than that of the number of items. Do you know why it breaks down when you give it like 6 or 7 or 8?
I think it's my feeling, and again, we haven't analyzed this, is that it's just that fewer small numbers are more common in the data.
Ah, gotcha.
Most images would just have a few, 2, 3, 4. And then the model has just never seen 10 or 20. And then there's also not, the way we train it, there's not this concept of graceful degradation from 10 to many, where it might just say, okay, a crowd of people, and then you generate what looks like 30 people. I think we need more. There have been papers that are trying to overcome this problem. I think explicitly through just enriching the data. I think more clever solutions are needed.
Thank you.
When you do not specify a background of a request, how does it happen that, is there a limited amount of backgrounds that it has to choose from randomly? Or is there some sort of a generator that it just, how does it work when you do not specify the background, for example, at all?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one thing we did was just type in nonsense into the text prompt and see what happens. And it seems to generate just random scenes, like of mountains and the beach and so on. It doesn't generate nonsense. So we think that the code book in the latent space is dominated by these kinds of backgrounds. And somehow that's what gets fed in when you go through the decoder. So yeah, I don't have a better answer than that.
Hi, thank you for the talk. On kind of the mask-free inpainting, super interesting. A lot of the prompts you showed had, like the correction was a small change from maybe the next slide, I think. One more, sorry. I'm looking for the one with the dog with the football in his mouth.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah. Right, many of these are kind of small changes from what's in there, right? You're going like, give it the input is a basket with apples in it, and you're saying oranges. Have you tried if the like editing text is completely different? Like you go from dog with a basketball to a cat bowling or something like that.
Yep. That
or even something crazy like a city.
Yep. That doesn't work. So we've tried that. It doesn't. So I think something like the instruct pix to pix, that it works for that because they explicitly train it with large edits. Part of the problem could be the way we do the editing, which is based on these small backprop steps, which just allow you to do local changes. So we don't know if it's a limitation of the model or a limitation of the gradient, the SGD steps we do when we're doing the editing. So what happens with the editing is you start with the original image, then take the text prompt and just keep backpropping till it settles down, converges, say 100 steps. And so each of those steps, like I showed here, is small changes. And if you want something like what you described, you need to have the ability to kind of jump faster through 100 steps. Maybe if you did it for 1 million steps, you could have that change. We haven't yet looked at that.
Yeah, it's almost like hard to imagine even what that middle ground would look like.
Yes, like do you have to pass through some valley of unrealistic images to get to this very large change? Here, each of those sub-steps look like believable things. So it could be an optimization problem.
Thank you.
Maybe extension on that same question. I'm curious for the case where not the entire image is changing, but maybe at the image level, you're changing like the style, for example, right? Like the main content is maintained, but the style is being changed and modified. Have you tried these type of things before?
Yes, I think so. Like, I don't have example. Maybe something like this. Maybe something like this. I think it seems much harder to do realistic pose changes like the kinds he was asking about compared to these global style changes, because I think the global style is controlled by maybe 1 or 2 elements of the code book or something like that, whereas to change pose or make drastic geometry changes might require much more interaction among the different tokens.
Hi, thank you for that great talk. I was wondering, how does the model determine which picture is more accurate to the description or which has a better resolution? Like what part of the model determines that without needing the human oversight?
So it doesn't. In practice, well, are you talking about training or inference?
With the inference.
So what we do is just use random seeds and generate a whole bunch of images, and then we just pick out the one we like. So often what happens is that if you have 8 images or 16, 3 or 4 of them would be really nice, and then a few of them would look really bad. And we still don't have a self-correcting way or an automated way to say this image matches the prompt better. So yeah, so in general, the hope is that the latent space has been trained in a sensible way so that it will generate plausible images.
Okay.
But for example, you might generate a cat with the legs all in the wrong position, and then it's still using the right elements of the codebook, but it arranged them wrongly. So we do see those kinds of mistakes.
Okay. So for your next step in improving the resolution, do you imagine you'd go about it the same way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'd have to somehow fix
Thank you.
those issues.
Okay, one more question.
So I kind of have two questions in one. So my first question is, I'm not sure what are the limitations on the size of the corpus for the text and for the images. But say there's like a new artist that hasn't come out yet, or like will in the next 2 months. If I were to ask in the prompt, say, I want you to draw this in the style of this thing that isn't invented yet, how would the model react to that change? And a separate question is, with these, especially the example with the masked images, the top row and the bottom row, how much new information are we actually getting from these images that the model spits out?
So it's a great questions. So for the data, clearly the data is biased towards famous artists, and that's why we can say things like in the style of Rembrandt or Monet, and it has seen many examples of those because this is data scraped from the web. If you had a new like the style of a new artist, the only current way to do it would be through fine-tuning, where we take those images of the person, pair it with some text, and then kind of train the model to generate that. This is kind of what the Dream Booth approach tries to do, although that's specific to objects rather than the style. But you could imagine using something like this for the style of a new artist. It's not yet zero shot, where you just present these examples and say, can you generate something based on this text prompt, but in that style? So that's something we would like to work towards. Regarding the masking, I didn't fully follow the question. So you said something about the top and bottom rows?
Yeah, I think it was one of the slides way past this one, but it was a pretty general question. It was, how much new information are we actually gaining from these, I guess, pictures that haven't, like, no one has seen before, like with the bear on the bicycle?
Oh, you mean, are you talking about memorization versus, like, is it actually, do you mean if this is already in the data set, the training data set?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is actually a great question, and I don't think we still have very good answers to this. Is a large language model just hallucinating some things it's seen before, just mix and match? Probably. It's probably, this is also doing something like that, where it's seen bears before and bikes and has been able to put them together in a plausible way. It's unlikely that the exact same image was in the data set, but again, we don't have really good tools yet to go in. Like we could try to search based on some kind of embedding, clip embedding or something, to look for similar images. But at the scale at which we are training hundreds of millions of images, we haven't actually gone in and looked to see how much is memorization versus new combination of concepts. I do think it's the latter, because it seems unlikely that these kinds of images would be in the training data set.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's give Dilip one more round of applause.